Ever feel like your brain is stuck in a bit of a rut? Like, what if there's a whole other level of reality we're just not seeing?
Mm,
Or maybe you've tossed and turned over a tough decision, wondering if there's a way to know what's truly right.
right.
Well, you're not alone. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the mind of Immanuel Kant,
Okay.
a philosophical heavyweight whose ideas are still shaping how we see the world, make choices, even appreciate beauty.
Yeah.
And trust me, this isn't just some dusty old philosophy lecture. We're handing you the cheat sheet to Kant's biggest ideas.
Sure.
Because, let's be honest, who's got time to wade through all those pages?
That's a great way to put it. Kant can be dense, but his ideas are incredibly powerful. He starts by asking a question that I bet you've pondered yourself at some point. Is the world we experience through our senses the real world, or is there something more going on behind the scenes?
Okay, I'm intrigued. It's like, my senses tell me this table is solid, but then science is all about atoms and empty space. So, which is it? What did Kant think?
Kant was wrestling with this exact problem. He was trying to figure out how much of our knowledge comes from our senses, what he called the phenomenal world, and how much comes from our own minds, the noumenal world. Think of it like this. Imagine you're watching a movie. The images, the sounds, the characters, that's the phenomenal world, the world as we experience it directly.
Okay, I'm with you so far. Popcorn, comfy seats, the whole experience.
Exactly. But what about the film reel itself, the projector, the entire process that makes those images appear on the screen?
Hmm.
That's like the noumenal world, the world as it truly is,
Yeah.
beyond our direct experience.
Hmm.
Kant argued that we can never fully grasp the noumenal world, the thing in itself. But our minds have these built-in structures that help us make sense of the phenomenal world.
Hold on. So I'm never going to truly know the real world. That's a bit of a downer, isn't it?
It might seem that way at first, but what's really cool is that Kant doesn't leave us there.
Okay.
He says, sure, we might not have direct access to the noumenal world, but our minds aren't just empty vessels. We have these built-in categories like space, time, causality
Yeah.
that act as filters, shaping how we experience the phenomenal world.
Okay.
They're like the scaffolding that lets us perceive and understand what our senses are telling us.
Okay, that's actually kind of freeing. So I shouldn't beat myself up for not having all the answers because, in a way, our brains are kind of pre-programmed to make sense of things in a certain way.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this whole phenomenal-noumenal distinction wasn't just some abstract philosophical idea to Kant. He believed it had huge implications for how we understand knowledge itself. He was trying to find a middle ground between two dominant philosophical camps at the time: the rationalists, who believed knowledge came from reason alone, and the empiricists, who said all knowledge came from experience.
So was Kant one of those reason above all else's kind of guys? How did he end up bridging that gap?
He actually started out leaning towards rationalism,
Oh.
but then another philosopher, David Hume, came along and really shook things up. Hume was skeptical about our ability to know things with absolute certainty. He questioned things like cause and effect, the idea that one event always leads to another. This really challenged Kant and forced him to rethink his whole approach.
So instead of panicking, Kant dove headfirst into this phenomenal, noumenal thing.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting. Kant realized that while we might not be able to know the noumenal world directly, our minds aren't passive observers. We actively structure our experience using these innate categories, and that's what makes knowledge possible.
Wow, okay. This is definitely making me think about how my brain works in a whole new way.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Kant's ideas about how we understand the world were just the beginning.
Mm.
He went on to apply this same kind of rigorous thinking to ethics, but that's a whole other chapter, and one we'll dive into right after this.
Okay, so we've explored how Kant thought we experienced the world with this whole phenomenal and noumenal thing.
Right.
It's like our brains have these built-in filters. But what happens when we start talking about, like, acting in the world, making choices? That's where things get really interesting, right?
Absolutely. Kant believed that just like our understanding of the world is shaped by these innate categories, our moral judgments are guided by a universal moral law. He called it the categorical imperative.
Categorical imperative? That sounds kind of intimidating.
It's a big phrase, but the idea is actually quite simple. Imagine this. Before you act, you ask yourself, what if everyone in every situation acted on the same rule I'm about to follow?
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's not just about whether I think something is okay. It's about whether it would hold up if it became a universal rule.
Exactly. It's like holding your actions up to this ultimate test of consistency and universality. Would the world be a better place if everyone followed this rule?
I see where you're going with this.
Okay.
Suddenly, that little white lie to avoid hurting someone's feelings doesn't seem so harmless anymore. What if everyone lived by that rule?
Precisely. Kant would argue that even if a white lie seems harmless in the moment, it undermines the principle of honesty, and that has far-reaching consequences.
So how do we figure out what these universal moral rules are? Does Kant give us like a list of commandments or something?
He gives us something even better, a principle for testing our actions. He says, act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law.
Okay, so it's like a thought experiment. I have to imagine what would happen if everyone acted the way I'm about to act.
Exactly. And it's not about predicting the specific consequences, but rather examining the principle behind the action. Could you live in a world where everyone operated by that principle?
This is making my brain do backflips. Okay, let's try a real-world example. What about those families who lied to protect Jewish refugees during World War II? Those were extreme circumstances. Surely Kant would make an exception, right?
That's a great example, and it gets right to the heart of why Kant's ethics are still so fiercely debated today. Remember, for Kant, it's not about the outcome itself, but the principle. Lying even to save a life goes against the universal moral law of honesty.
But wouldn't that mean condemning those families for their actions even though they were trying to do the right thing? It feels like there needs to be some nuance here.
That's the thing about Kant. He pushes us to confront these incredibly difficult moral dilemmas head on. He forces us to examine the justifications for our actions, even when they seem like the only compassionate choice.
So maybe it's not about easy answers, but about a rigorous, almost uncomfortable level of self-reflection.
Exactly. Kant isn't giving us a pat answer or a rule book. He's giving us a framework for thinking critically about right and wrong, for moving beyond our gut reactions and considering the broader implications of our choices.
Okay, so we've covered how we understand the world and how we should act in it. Did Kant have anything to say about the things we enjoy, like art and beauty?
Okay, from knowledge to morality, now we're diving into beauty. I have to admit, I'm picturing Kant with like a paintbrush debating the ethical implications of different color palettes. Laughs. Well, he wouldn't be Kant without a healthy dose of rigorous analysis. But you're right, he did have some fascinating thoughts on beauty. And just like with knowledge and morality, he was looking for those underlying principles, the universal threads that connect us all to a sense of the beautiful.
All right, so what's Kant's big idea when it comes to beauty? What makes something truly beautiful beyond just personal taste?
Get ready for this. Purposiveness without purpose.
Wait, what? That sounds like a riddle wrapped in a contradiction.
It does, doesn't it? But stay with me. It's really quite brilliant. Think about it like this. Imagine you're watching a breathtaking sunset. The colors, the light, that feeling of awe it inspires.
Okay, I'm picturing it. It's beautiful.
Exactly. But here's the thing, that sunset isn't for anything. The sun isn't setting to impress us or create a masterpiece.
Right.
And yet we experience this profound beauty, this sense of purposefulness, even though there's no practical function.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. It's like the beauty isn't about what it does, but how it makes us feel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Kant would say that this feeling of purposiveness comes from how our minds are wired. We're constantly seeking out patterns, meaning even where there's no obvious goal or intention.
So whether it's a sunset, a symphony, or even, I don't know, a perfectly arranged bookshelf, our brains find beauty in order and harmony.
You got it. And here's where it connects back to Kant's whole project. Just like with the categories of understanding that shape how we experience the world, our capacity for appreciating beauty is a fundamental part of being human.
Okay, I'm seeing the common thread here, whether it's knowledge, morality, or even beauty. Kant believed there were these underlying principles, these universal structures that shape our experience.
Precisely. And just as he challenged us to think critically about what we can know and how we should act, he pushed us to consider the nature of beauty itself, to move beyond just saying, I like it or I don't like it.
Wow. So Kant's legacy is about more than just his specific ideas. It's about the way he asked questions, the way he forced us to examine our own assumptions.
Absolutely. He gave us a whole new framework for thinking about the world and our place in it.
Well, there you have it. We've barely scratched the surface of Kant's vast and complex philosophy. But hopefully this deep dive has given you a few mental tools to grapple with some of life's biggest questions.
And who knows, the next time you're marveling at a work of art, wrestling with a tough decision, or even just gazing up at the stars, you might find yourself thinking, what would Kant say about this?
And that, my friend, is the mark of a truly influential thinker, someone whose ideas stay with us long after we've encountered them.